the challenging one is the pre-match walk where it's raining. What do you do then?
That's when you hand it over to the captain. You ask him to take the route, and he normally goes one circle of the world's smallest car park and then walks back in 1 minute later, saying this is pointless.
So why wouldn't you apportion quite a bit of time?
As long as you can use 10 phases after the set play to count it as a set play goal.
That depends.
That's how you get it up to that.
That's a good point. That's a good point. What other meal of your life would you have? Chicken, lasagna, maybe fish, maybe some noodles, and maybe curry all on the same plate. What's that all about, Dave?
It's a cultural kaleidoscope of food. Yes.
And it's like players will find excuses from time to time, or different types of players will find different types of excuses. So
the green pesto wasn't green enough.
Yes, yeah, that type of player. Yeah. Welcome, football fans, to Breaking Lines, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the beautiful game like never before. I'm Gary Rowett, former player and manager, joined by the insightful Dave Carolan, a man with his finger on the pulse of football's beating heart. Together, Dave and I bring you unrivaled insight, context, and a few stories from the trenches. Join us as we dissect the game, break down the plays, and explore the intricate dance between managers, players, fans, and the beautiful game itself. This is Breaking Lines, where the game is more than just a match.
One of the joys of all the away games we have to go to each season is it's not just a journey on the coach or on a train, or, as we've said previously, we never fly, but getting to the away hotel and having to kill about 20 hours between arriving there and then the game starting the following day. How do you fill that time? What happens at a hotel on a Friday night?
Friday night, well, you'd imagine all sorts of frivolity and partying, wouldn't you? But actually quite boring, to be honest with you, isn't it? So, no, I think you get to that point, don't you, where you certainly that Saturday away game, I've seen so many people do it so many different ways, but I think usually there's that little part of you, what hopefully everything's boxed off, the team, the tactics, everything, and you can get on that train or that coach or whatever it is, and you can relax. But often it doesn't work anything like that, does it?
The work is done. Let's just go and enjoy
Let's
the
just
game.
go and enjoy it. Let's have a couple of drinks on an evening. Let's watch the match and let's just chill out, But it never quite works like that. For a player, it works like that, doesn't it? For a player, usually your work's done. You might know whether you're in the team or not. You might have sorted out your tickets. You know that you just got to get on the coach, and then you're in game preparation mode, aren't you? You know, as a player, particularly, if you're a single player, then maybe it's quite a long period of time. If you're away from your family, then maybe it's not ideal. And there's some players that maybe if you're away from your family, you can get a decent, nice kit because you've got young kids. Maybe it's something you look forward to because actually might be better preparation for the game than staying at home.
I know many a player who's asked to travel the night before, if at all possible, even if the game is at home. Can we travel to the game?
Yeah, and that's what you get, don't you? So you get different degrees of players liking it, not liking it, but it's part of what we do in it. Often twice a week or twice a month, depending on the fixture list, we're sat in a hotel the night before a game, and it is a little bit Groundhog Day when you've been there doing it for about 15 years, isn't it? So every hotel's not the same. Of course, like different degrees of quality of food, for example. So we've been to some hotels and the food's absolutely brilliant. And you think, wow, I'm actually looking forward to getting there. And we've had other hotels where they haven't quite managed to get it all out on time. And you sat there as a manager.
Or at all.
And you're sat there thinking, oh my God. And I'm looking at you guys thinking, even though you're not cooking the food and you haven't organised the travel, I'm thinking, you need to sort this out quick because this is going to start getting embarrassing with the players. And you don't want to start an away game with that feeling of things going wrong logistically and on the way to games, do you? Or you might set off and suddenly you start getting stuck in traffic and the coach driver's joking about it. you're secretly starting to get annoyed. It's not their fault necessarily, but you're getting annoyed because you think this is going to be one of those 7-8 hours where the players, by the time they get to the hotel, are absolutely chewing. Because if we'd have gone a different way, we'd have been there by now, or we'd have been there in 4 hours. So I think there's different scenarios about the mood that you arrive at the hotel in, isn't there? I mean, you're probably best placed to answer this first bit. How challenging is, let's say we're getting the train somewhere. So let's say we're in London. We're getting the train out of London because, of course, that's one of the big challenges we found managing a club in London is sometimes on a Friday.
Just getting out of London.
Just getting out of London on a Friday at 1 o'clock. You know, you don't matter when you leave, sometimes it can take you 2 hours to get out of London. So a lot of times we would get the train. Let's say you're in charge of those logistics. How tough is that with 22 players and maybe 15 staff all going all their own ways for coffee and sandwiches and whatever? And, you know, how tough are those logistics to manage?
I mean, when I started, it was so simple. Like, you just literally had to make sure the bus turned up on time. You got the players on as soon as they were ready, and that was it. They just departed, and the card schools would take over, and everyone just kind of amused themselves, you know. So even if it took 6 hours, they were all together and they had decent crack going on. But nowadays, of course, with how we travel and the level of quality of the traveling, I mean, players now plugging into their own systems for gaming or whatever, you know, headphones are on. So it becomes a little bit more insular. So you're trying to keep everybody essentially within that comfort time window they have before they get bored or before they get to the point where they're frustrated. So 11 minutes later, yeah, certainly trying to navigate yourself around the country. We're generally working back from how long is it going to take us to get wherever that location is, which gets us to the hotel with enough time, with a little bit of comfort for the players and the staff to get to the room, settle in, and then get down for dinner at whatever time that's going to be at. So 6:30, 7, 7:30, whatever's decided. So you're working back from that. You're allowing some time for the inevitable traffic finder system that the bus driver is using in order to find a traffic jam somewhere on the way, an accident.
Standard.
Yes. So once you've built in some, you know, percentage of extra time to allow for that, it's then thinking, right, what time are we going to leave? And then you're hopefully choosing a good time to train to allow you to, again, with relative comfort, be able to do everything so nothing feels rushed. I think the challenge comes when, especially getting out of London, you have to navigate London public transport. And that means inevitably people are rushing through underground stations, train stations, or racing around to whatever the location might be that they have to get to in order to start the journey. So there's almost a journey before the journey, and then eventually you get to the hotel.
You've lost that 16-year-old that's travelled with the first team that hasn't had parental consent, and you've lost him on the Jubilee line somewhere.
Yeah. Tagging a player on who has to be, you know, under house arrest the whole way up there. That's another challenge for the safeguarding people out there listening. We've never lost anybody. Yeah.
So I think, so let's presume we arrive at the hotel okay and everything's sorted. I mean, there's probably different parts of this, isn't there? So I think the obvious thing is, you know, when do we have the meetings, or when do we have the preparation parts to the game? So often you would have done your team meeting on the morning before you travel, or, you know, the opposition team meeting. I think what we would tend to do is, you know, by the time the players get to the hotel, they'd go straight in for the set piece meeting. So we'd have a separate set piece meeting that the coaches would potentially take.
How long would that last for? And is that going through all the set plays, or is that the opposition ones?
That would usually the opposition set plays where, so what you would usually do there is, okay, this is how the opposition attack set pieces. Let's highlight some of those movements. So, you know, let's say it's a corner. Okay, these are the short corners that they've done. This is what we're going to do to counteract that. These are the blocks that they've done. These are the ways we're going to defend to counteract that. So I think you're giving them a really good visual on a big screen within a presentation where you're highlighting certain individuals, or you're highlighting the amounts of players that do certain things. So if there's 4 players that attack it, then you're highlighting those four. It might be the same 4 players every week. It might be different versions of that, depending on how many players they've got that would do that. You might then look at then how they then defend corners. Let's just use corners as an example. These are the spaces that they leave. These are the spaces, we think we can drag them to the near post and get someone round the back post for a shot. We think we can drag them all towards the goal and we can get someone round the penalty spot or edge of the box for a shot. Different scenarios. They zonal mark. They man-to-man mark. They do a combination of both. So there's lots of different ways that you would show those set pieces. I think the importance of that meeting is quite simple, that no matter what level of football you play at, we spoke about it before, statistically, let's say it's between conservatively between 30 and 40% of all goals in the Championship are scored from set pieces. I think even in the World Cups, let's say it's 25% to 30%. So why wouldn't you apportion quite a bit of time?
As long as you can use 10 phases after the set play to count it as a set play goal.
That depends.
That's how you get it up to that number.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But I think all that information, I think, is valid.
Yes.
It might sit alongside your team opposition meeting. It might sit alongside your game plan meeting. But I think ultimately it's just as important. So that would tend to happen. And sometimes I would sit in that meeting. Sometimes I'd let them get on with it. When you're always in the same meetings talking about the same things, sometimes I'd let the coaches get on with it. I'd sit in there.
They can be just reminders rather than actual, formal, this team does something vastly different. Yeah. It can just be reminders. Because you would have gone through some of that anyway in the morning.
I was just going to say that, don't forget, we'd have done that in the morning. We'd have probably spent 20 minutes at the end of training, or half an hour at the end of training. You might even have done it the day before as well. So I think, they're just reinforcements. They're an opportunity to show that phase live that you've actually spoken about in the morning, but you haven't actually showed the players. You might show them before and then do it. It depends on your time and what you tend to do. But often we would do that at a hotel. I think then you've got the next morning where you've got the game plan meeting. So then there would be an opportunity just before you leave. Sometimes, usually, if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, you do it just before you leave. If it's an evening kickoff, you'd probably do it after lunch because you've got a bit more time in the day. And that would be let's go back over what we're going to try and do to win the game. You might name the team if you haven't named it. You might rename the team just so you know who's on the bench, because often you'd name the team, you wouldn't name the bench. You might have 20 players or you might have 22 players travelling. So there's different meetings, there's different ways of articulating and showing that meeting. And I think sometimes then there's different ways, isn't there? We've been at clubs where the staff use it as an opportunity to actually spend time together and build a bit of camaraderie. And we've had it where, we'll have a game of cards or something in the evening, or we'll sit and watch a game in the evening all together, and we might have a couple of glasses of wine, because at that point we've more or less done our work. Sometimes that's interspersed by you guys. I mean, give me an idea of what sort of things the players would need on the evening prior, because not all the staff would be in watching the game straight away because they'd still be working. So
no, certainly the medical staff and potentially some of the performance staff will be providing different type of support services to the players. So that would be massage, or maybe stretching, or maybe pool sessions. Quite often in the past, if we've had a long journey, we'd have arranged that the hotel will have a pool, and then we can go straight in from the journey and kind of get them moving and active again, because they can spend like 5-6 hours just sat in a coach, which isn't ideal preparation to be sat down almost pretty much static for so long. So we get them into the pool, they'll come in, do their meeting, have some food, which is normally, it's probably one of the best times of the week because everybody, like staff and players, can all be in the same room together. And while you would think the players might just head back to their rooms, they often stay down there for like a good hour, don't they? And just chat, and you actually see the different groups having good fun together. And then if some aren't having treatment, we've been at one club where they ended up playing, it's the hottest game in town at the moment, Traitors, isn't it? But recently at Millwall, they were playing, what was it called? Wolfie. I think it was.
Yeah.
And we were bemused by this game that they were heading off, but the players headed off for probably 2+ hours, essentially playing this other form of what is a popular TV program now, Traitors. They were playing that, 2 years ago. So yet again, in a cutting edge environment, way ahead of anybody else knowing about
Apparently, a lot of
training.
the European teams already play that, and that's where I think it came in, didn't it? A lot of our sort of players we signed from European teams perhaps brought it in, and actually it was quite interesting, wasn't it? Because that probably things like that actually build your culture and build that camaraderie. When you have a scenario where all the players are going to play, it doesn't really matter what they're doing, does it? The players want to spend time all together after the meal, and that's quite key, isn't it? I've seen different clubs do different things. So I've been at clubs where the staff go and have a meal separately somewhere else and the players do it on their own. I've seen it where...
Good times. I can tell you
better
that.
Meal.
better meal.
A la carte menu.
Oh, yes. Salivating as you say.
Until that started to go on your P11D. No, I'm only joking. And I've also seen it where, I've seen it a long time ago where the staff would go out. I mean, that wouldn't work for me but that was obviously a very different culture. One of the very few times I've ever seen, this is a bit that always fascinates me, and I do it. What of a meal of your life would you have? Chicken, lasagna, maybe fish, maybe some noodles, and maybe curry all on the same plate. What's that all about, Dave?
It's a cultural kaleidoscope of food. Yes. Yeah, we've moved on, I think, from providing like a standard spaghetti bolognese and soup, not necessarily in that order, but I think just the challenge of players who've got so many different preferences now about how they like to prepare means it is essentially a smorgasbord of food that's out there, and players can choose whether it's potatoes, rice, spaghetti, all different forms of meat. I mean, there's just so much food now provided. So you have to be really regimented as a member of staff across the season to ensure that you don't overeat on those away games, but always leave enough room for the apple crumble. Which is
quality of the apple crumble.
Which is the standard. Every hotel is measured against is how good the apple crumble is.
Or the short straw, you're a vegan player. And you turn up and there's one vegan option. Everyone else has got 25 options and there's one vegan option.
Yeah, but the vegan option also has fully, he's got as much as all of the others have for their whole meals. We also have to cater for, different people with different dietary requirements, so whether that's kosher food, whether that's those who are vegan or vegetarian. So that's a challenge, and you have to make sure that the hotels box that off correctly. So in the past, again, food hygiene is important to ensure there's no contamination. I've had players in the past with various, kind of nutritional challenges, if you want to call it, who've got allergies that you might think that they can't have food that's been in contact with any form of nut or anything like that. Or you have players who have got, an allergy to things like celery. And you're having to also ensure that when you're going to hotels that they've been hygienic with the food preparation. And actually what I realized years ago was I just stick that on every menu now, because what it does do is it makes every hotel ensure that their food preparation is good. So you don't necessarily have to have somebody who's got an allergy, but putting it on there ensures that at least the food's going to be prepared like tip top.
I suppose that's the experience, isn't it? When you've done so many trips, like someone like yourself has, that I suppose you get, there's nothing worse than something going wrong at a hotel, is it? And the player's in a negative state over something quite small that then can start to drift into the whole trip and drift into your Saturday's mentality a little bit. And it's like players will find excuses from time to time, or different types of players will find different types of excuses. So
the green pesto wasn't green enough.
Yes, yeah, that type of player. Yeah. But those are the challenges, aren't they? So I suppose if you get the meal out of the way, let's say you've been disciplined and you've only had about 3 different main courses on your plate, and you've had the apple crumble.
Excellent work.
And all the players have gone. And then at that point, I suppose then, again, what would most of us do? We'd sit and watch the match. So not everybody, not every member of staff loves watching football. Not every player loves watching football. I've had it where we've got the match on a big screen and there might be 4 or 5 of the players sat there with the staff watching it. Or, there might be 4 or 5 of the staff watching it. or there might be 10 of us staff watching it. So again, if there's a match on, often we'd sit there, we'd have a beer. And as a manager, it's quite a funny time because often your state of relaxation is going to be dictated to by your team and how confident you are that you've picked it properly and your tactics. Let's say you've won 3 games on the spin and you've got no reason to change the team and nobody's complaining that you're not changing the team because you've won the games, and the players can't say too much if you're out the team. And you know you're going to roll with the same team. You've picked it in the day. There's nothing controversial. You can probably be quite relaxed watching that game. Utopia. That is utopia. Unfortunately, that's never happened very often. But there could be so many things going on through your head. You know, I could have 2. We touched on this in one of the other episodes. I could have 2 players that I've got to leave out the team, and I'm sat watching with a glass of wine, thinking this is a false dawn because at some point I've got to try and find that player. Yeah. I've got to try and catch him, maybe going out the meal, or I've got to try and catch him, you know, in the lobby or whatever afterwards, and use that opportunity where I can speak to him face to face. I might be watching the match and not even really watching the match, just thinking about the team and what I've got to do and what do I need to change, or is the game plan good enough? Is the game plan realistic enough? So I think there's so many different scenarios that you can be in on that evening. And that's no different to the next morning. You know, the next morning you come down for breakfast, you're looking for a certain player, that player doesn't turn up. So now you're thinking, when am I going to grab him? I'm going to have to wait till pre-match now. I'm going to have to wait for the walk. Why do we do a walk? Is that just, does every team do a walk?
Every team does a walk.
Is that just something that's happened is that still scientifically proven?
Absolutely.
The right form?
I can't name the piece of research, but, you know, subjectively, every team knows it has to go.
It's been independently studied.
Yeah, I don't know, because when I started, again, it was just something that teams did. They all went for a walk. I think it was probably to ensure all the players had got out of bed, which was probably the first thing, because breakfast was not always compulsory, but pre-match was. When us scientists brought in pre-match, because it essentially was one of those things where we were telling players that they can't just fuel up for breakfast, have a sandwich and go and play a game of football and expect to have optimal performance. It's not to mean you can't play, but you're just probably going to run out of energy.
Or clubs saying we're not going to pay for both. We'll let you have, because that happened quite a lot, didn't it?
Yes.
We'll let you have either breakfast or pre-match, or do some form of
hybrid,
some sort of hybrid meal. Yeah, wasn't it? Because players had come down at
a pre-match.
Players had come down at say 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at the end of breakfast and have a bit of breakfast, but not a lot. And then at 11 o'clock or half 11, they're then coming into pre-match. So essentially, when you're really looking, as if you're going to wait that late, or you've got the player who wants to come down at 8 o'clock because that's his routine, and he needs breakfast. So that was also a challenge, wasn't it? You know, in your early days, that must have been a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I tell you what, the biggest challenge was the player who didn't want to come to breakfast, but breakfast was compulsory. So he came in with 30 seconds to go of the window of breakfast. So let's say breakfast finished at 9:30. He'd come in at 9:29. He'd literally come in, sit on a seat for like 5 seconds and get up and go again. And go, I was here. It's not the point. We're asking you to eat. But anyway, the walk was just something that obviously came in to ensure that everybody was up and out and ready. And at least when they were going into pre-match, they were a little bit more alert than they were if they were just sitting around the bed. But yet, ironically, if it was a home game, you had zero control as to what they did and what time they got up, and even if they had a pre-match. But I think players are far more professional now. They get up and they get active in the morning.
Yeah, they do something, wouldn't they? I suppose the challenging one is the pre-match walk where it's raining. What do you do then?
That's when you hand it over to the captain. You ask him to take the route, and he normally goes one circle of the world's smallest car park and then walks back in 1 minute later, you know, saying this is pointless. But I think we now scramble into some kind of force other physical activation session to just, again, try and get them at least physiologically a little bit more alert than they were like 4 minutes before when they crawled out of bed for some of them.
So we've got the nutrition sorted, we've got the travel sorted, we've got the pre-match walk and the physical preparation sorted. now I suppose there comes that point when I do that pre-match meeting and you're now starting to, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you're often, let's say your meeting is at 12:30 and you're leaving straight away, maybe at 1:45. You think it's going to take maybe 45 minutes to half an hour. And, you're giving yourself that little bit of time. So you're still 2.5 hours away from kickoff. So you can't really get the players super motivated for the game just yet. You got to try and find that in between motivational talk. I would tend to stick to just the tactical pieces at that point. I would tend to stick to just the game plan pieces and try to keep it focused really on what do we need to do? What do we need to do positively to try and win the game? And then I would often think about that. The last thing you say to the players before they go out on the pitch, more as a psychological touch, more as a psychological impact talk and how you might do that. A little bit like the halftime team talk, which we spoke about.
Yeah.
And I think that's when suddenly your trip, your away trip, your journey, your preparation now starts to turn that switch into, you're there to win the game all the way along. But I think players sometimes need that little switch, and often coming down for that meeting in the tracksuits all together, sat formally in front of a screen, often for a player, that's the point where, they start to really get into that match day mode, don't they? They start to get into that match day psychology of, now I'm thinking about the game. Now I might start to visualize on the bus, or I might start to play my favorite music, or I might start to play my video of me scoring goals or whatever. And I think that's probably a really poignant cut-off for the player. Now it's game time. Now it's work time.
Yeah, I think it's practically impossible for them to go the whole of a journey thinking about the game and nothing but the game nowadays, because a lot of the players, certainly at Premier League, Championship, and probably even in League One level now, would have their own rooms. So you've moved away from a time where they naturally relax with a teammate in the room and they just talk about anything and everything. Now players can be quite isolated when they're at a hotel, whether they're gaming. They'll even game across rooms when they're playing against each other, but just be in separate rooms. They have their own rooms now. I suppose that's changed over the years, where the players have decided that they're going to be a little bit more isolated, a little bit more individual, but certainly by the time they've come down, done the walk, and by the time they've finished the meeting and we're on our way, they've switched into game mode now, and hopefully they've slept better, because you've not had somebody in the bed next to you, not in the actual bed next to you, but in a separate bed in the same room, but snoring away. You've got a good night's rest, and hopefully you're prepared for the game.
They're the different things, aren't they? I suppose when you look back and you think of how the games or a Friday night has changed over the years, you'd certainly have a lot more overnight stays, wouldn't you, than you previously did? Because often before it would be, okay, you can have an overnight stay for the long trip. And that then really, I suppose, Championship and above, maybe even League One and above, that then suddenly became, well, probably League Two as well, maybe even a conference, but that became almost, a Friday night became the norm.
Yep.
When I played non-league, it was almost like you travel to every away game on the Saturday if you could, just to save money. So, but nowadays, I think everyone budgets in that overnight stay and that overnight and that sort of journey on the Friday. Like you say, again, things like rooms, own room, not shared room, So I think there's a lot of things that have changed, haven't they? But ultimately, often it's, you want it to go as smoothly as you can. You want to be as organised as you can. You want to give the players zero excuses, and you want to prepare in the best possible way, because as we all know, hard enough winning an away game as it is.
So if those hotels listening can make sure that the pesto is green enough. Thank you. There you have it. Episode 10 of Season 1 of Breaking Lines. And it was all about getting to the away fixtures. The challenge of just getting out of London, for example. You have a journey before you begin your actual journey out of the capital to the other part of the country. The logistics of getting everyone to the hotel can be a challenge, especially if the coach driver has their traffic radar set to join every traffic jam. Catering for a professional football team is complex. Dietary requirements, variety across a meal and a season, and ensuring that the apple crumble has enough crumble and just the right type of custard. And then it's prep for the game. Meetings galore and then off to victory. or at least that's the plan. Please subscribe to us on your podcast provider and give us a rating and perhaps a review. We appreciate them all, and they help us climb the podcast league. Join us next time on Breaking Lines. Thanks for listening.